let's talk about positive perceptions of aging. What makes a successful ager? Now, we've talked about a lot over this course, and so we all want to be successful agers. What does that involve? There are four factors that psychologists have identified. One is the absence of disease. The second is high physical and cognitive functioning. So, being able to move around, play sports even. Um, you can still have good memory and still participate in some kind of challenging intellectual activity. Number three is engagement with life. So you're very, interested in what's going on around you. You're still up to date with the current events. Maybe you're interested in music or new books coming out. And the fourth factor is social support and involvement with others. So remaining socially embedded, having friendships that are rewarding, having a rewarding marital relationship, and friendships and family relationships with others. So if you can have all four of these factors, that's a wonderful way to age, of course. And it's important to remember that these factors are interconnected. So one factor will affect the other, right? If we have disease, that's going to affect our physical and cognitive functioning. It can affect our engagement with life. It can prevent us from interacting with others. We know that if we don't have social support, that will also more likely increase the chances of disease and increase chances of Alzheimer's disease, etc. So these things go hand in hand and are very interconnected. Based on these factors as definitions, about 1 out of 3 people could be considered a successful ager. So quite a substantial amount. And you've learned lots of things about aging, and I hope that hasn't discouraged you at all about the aging process, but instead has shown you how things can actually be quite different from what we expect. And one study actually looked at this scientifically. They asked people from age 18 to 64, what percentage of older people experience memory loss, or what percentage of people have a serious illness when they're older, etc. And you can see here that people expect much more negative numbers than what's actually true. So, for example, people will say, oh, I think about 29% of older people are lonely, but actually only 17% report that they are lonely. I think 34% are not sexually active when they're older, but actually only 21% are not sexually active. So, in general, people tend to have negative expectations of aging, and the picture that they're painting in their heads is worse than it actually is. Why is this important? One study found that positive perceptions of aging was associated with living longer. And this study was longitudinal. They followed people over 23 years. They assessed people from age 50 to 94. And they just looked at, every year from the beginning of the study, is this person alive or have they passed away already? So they did something called a survival analysis. So this graph is a little bit difficult, but you can see at this 0.5 level, this indicates when 50% of the sample has passed away already. And the dark line on top are people who had positive perceptions of aging. The line on the bottom are people who had less positive perceptions of aging. So those people were more likely to endorse things like things keep getting worse as I get older. As you get older, you're less useful. And so you can see here that less people with less positive perceptions, about 16 years after the first assessment, half of them were already passed away. But it took about 23 years for half of the people with positive perceptions to pass away. And that distance between those two arrows was about 7.5 years, which was, really huge. Imagine being able to live 7.5 years longer. So people who had more positive perceptions of aging tended to live about 7.5 years longer than people with less positive perceptions. And this study was strong because they actually adjusted for things like age, gender, socioeconomic status, loneliness, and baseline functional health. Of course, there's a question of causality. The previous study was prospective, which was stronger, but still people might question what's the directional causality. Is it really that positive perceptions causes us to live longer? Or is it that factors associated with living longer causes positive perceptions? So maybe people who had positive perceptions were already, in better condition somehow, and that caused them to have these positive perceptions anyway. More recent research suggests that it's really more likely the top pattern, where positive perceptions does cause us to live longer. One other study I want to share with you looked at how much we endorse age stereotypes. So in this study, they looked at pretty young people who were all healthy, age 49 or younger, and they followed them over time. They asked these participants at baseline how much they endorse age stereotypes. How much do you believe things like old people are helpless? So everyone in this study said they were very healthy. They said they're about a 4.6 on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest health. None of them had ever experienced a cardiovascular event. That means things like congestive heart failure, stroke, myocardial infarctions, angina attacks, and transient ischemic attacks. And they covaried lots of factors like gender, age, body mass index, depression, education, family history of cardiovascular events, marital status, health, race, cholesterol, smoking, and blood pressure, all things that could determine cardiovascular events. What they found that if you were more likely to endorse negative age stereotypes at baseline, you were actually 2 times more likely to have a cardiovascular event years later, especially after age 60. And this is especially if you looked at the younger subset of the sample, those who were 18 to 39 at first. Right, so here again we see that how we perceive aging can affect our physical health. The more positive we are, the more likely we'll live longer and less likely we'll have a cardiovascular event.